So welcome now after a long delay. I'm very, very sorry for this, but we had technical difficulties. We sorted everything out now. And I'm happy to welcome you in person and on the internet. My name is Anton Schweitzer. I teach art and architectural history here at Kyushu University's International MA and Doctorate program IMAP and IDOC. This is the second guest lecture of our project Shared Coasts, Divided Historiographies. This project is made possible through generous funding from the Getty Foundation through its program Connecting Art History. Our speaker today is Dr. D. Max Moerman, professor in the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Cultures at Barnard College, Columbia University, New York. Professor Moerman specializes in the visual and material culture of Japanese religions. He received his A.B. from Columbia College and his PhD from Stanford. Among his long and I believe pretty well-known list of publications are the book Localizing Paradise, Kumano Pilgrimage and the Religious Landscape of Premodern Japan, which came out in 2005. And his second book, much more recent, from 2021, is the Japanese Buddhist World Map, Religious Vision and the Cartographic Imagination. He also published articles on defilement and enlightenment and sutra burials, and his current research project is on oaths and curses. Professor Max Moerman is a long-standing friend and guest speaker at our IMAP IDOC program. When we asked him to contribute a guest lecture to our Getty series, he said instantly yes, and suggested right away today's topic, which is titled Angkor Wat as Gion Shōja, Japanese mappings of Buddhist India in Maritime East Asia. So please join me in welcoming Max Moerman.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I have to explain Q&A quickly. So whenever you want to ask a question, please send it through the chat. You can send it at any time, and we're going to read them out after the lecture and answer. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Thank you very much to Professor Anton Schweitzer for inviting me. And thank you all for your patience in waiting for this delayed start for today's talk. I would like to begin my talk this evening with a rather unusual Japanese map that you see on the screen in front of you. It's a manuscript painted in ink and colors on paper, measuring 75 by 68.5 centimeters, and is now in the collection of the Mito Tokugawa Museum. It depicts a planometric view of a rectangular temple complex with a 5-storied pagoda surrounded by 3 enclosures of galleries, the first of which has 4 and the others 8 single-story pagodas. Around this all is a thinner wall and a final exterior enclosure with openings in the 4 cardinal directions. The entire complex is surrounded by a moat of water and an outermost perimeter wall with 4 gates and walkways at their midpoint. The main entrance at the middle of the eastern wall has 3 gates and 3 towers with a path leading to a cruciform terrace and then a structure formed of 3 east-west galleries connected by a 4th north-south gallery. Although the plan is unlike anything found in East Asian temple architecture, the details of the buildings follow Japanese building styles, as do the lion dogs, the koma inu, flanking each of the 4 outermost gates, and a pair of guardian figures, the neo, on either side of the main entrance. I wish I had a better image of this. I will have one soon. I'll be viewing this map tomorrow in Mito, but for now you'll have to take my word for the details that appear on the screen. Other details are more specific. There are some 90 annotations inscribed throughout the plan, specifying the dimensions and materials of individual buildings, walls, verandas, doors, and stairways. Ponds and pagodas, columns and balustrades are each identified. 4 Buddha images, 2 each of Shakyamuni seated and lying down, and 4,000 additional gilded Buddhas are noted, as are the location and subject matter of panels of bas-relief sculptures on the exterior and interior walls. Let me see. How do I advance this? It didn't move. Okay. Oh, those ones. Okay. Yes, there you go. A title inscribed in the upper right corner identifies the site. It reads, Gion Shōja. This refers not to Gion Shrine or Yasaka Jinja located in the Gion district of today's Kyoto, or even the Gion subway stop that I passed on my way here out of Hakata, but rather to the Jetavana Vihara in the ancient city of Shravasti, among the earliest and most famous Buddhist monastic complexes in Buddhist India, where Shakyamuni is said to have lived for many years and was the setting for many of the early sutras. The inscription goes on to explain the origins of Jetavana as follows. Sudatta, minister of the land of Shravasti, asked Jeta, crown prince and son of Prasanjit, to grant him 80 ko of land in Jetavana, the prince's private park. He paid the prince with the amount of gold that would cover the land granted, and on this spot, he had the Jetavana Vihara built. This is a story found throughout Buddhist scriptures and texts and commentaries and histories. And a longer inscription shown here at the bottom of the map, but I believe is on the back, and I'll figure out whether this is folded or unfolded tomorrow. A longer inscription dated 1772 identifies the map as a copy made in 1715 of an earlier map drawn in the early 17th century. It reads, Shimano Kendyo, chief interpreter from Nagasaki, was ordered by the shogun, here Tokugawa Iemitsu, to go to Jetavana in the country of Magadha in central Tenjiku, to examine it and report on it upon his return, end quote. Yet this early 18th century copy of an early 17th century map does not, of course, depict Jetavana in the country of Magadha in central Tenjiku. Jetavana lay in ruins when Xuanzang visited 1,000 years earlier and was not rediscovered until the 19th century by Alexander Cunningham, who used the accounts of Xuanzang and Fashan for guidance. Rather, the map is a plan of the great Khmer temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, or what is today Cambodia. And the identification of Angkor Wat was first made in 1912 by, here we have the plan next to a drawing of the layout of the central structure of Angkor Wat. This identification was first made in 1712 by Ito Chuta, the architect and architectural historian, who gave a lecture on this very map for the Meiji Emperor on the occasion of an imperial visit to Tokyo Imperial University in 1912, the very year of the emperor's death. I hope the lecture is not what caused his death. Cambodia was quite well known to Japanese maritime traders in the early 17th century. In 1601, a Japanese merchant had won the confidence of the king of Cambodia, had established trade with the Southeast Asian kingdom, as well as Japan towns, Nihonmachi, in what is now Phnom Penh and Honhea Liao. I really don't know how to pronounce that place name. Actually, I didn't know what it was until yesterday because I'd only read it in katakana, and you can't find it on any map. But this is what I have come to believe it is. Honhea Loe. On the southeast shore of Tonle Sap, the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia, where Japanese Christians built a church in 1616. Angkor Wat lies just on the other side of Tonle Sap, just on the other side, as if it were just on the other side of Lake Biwa, on the opposite shore from where the community of Japanese traders and Christians resided. Even more explicit evidence of the Japanese presence at Angkor is provided by Japanese inscriptions at the Khmer Temple. Here we are, at the Khmer Temple, dating from the early decades of the 17th century, which were first recorded and studied by Japanese scholars in the 1930s. The diagram on the left shows you that foremost cruciform structure, and on the right, the location of the inscriptions on the different square pillars. 14 extant Japanese inscriptions dating from 1612 to 1632 were brushed in ink on the upper reaches of the flat surfaces of stone pillars within the cruciform cloister, known as Premodern, at the main entrance to the central sanctuary of Angkor. These were the years in which ships operating under the Red Seal or Suisen system of the Tokugawa Bakufu were authorized to travel and trade throughout the ports of maritime Southeast Asia. And although the remains of most of these inscriptions are incomplete, they identify the Japanese visitors who left them as hailing from some such centers of maritime trade as Sakai and Osaka, as well as from your neighborhood, Kizen, Higo, Hirado, and Nagasaki in Kyushu. The best preserved of these inscriptions, and this gives you an idea of what the inscriptions looked like on the pillar in this rather poor photograph, but the best one I could find. The best preserved of these inscriptions is dated the first month of 1632 and reads as follows. I first arrived here during the new year of 1632, the 9th year of the Kane era. I am Morimoto Ukondayu Kazufusa from Japan, a resident of Hishu and an attendant of the Fujiwara clan. With this revered temple in mind, I crossed thousands of ri across the sea to offer 4 Buddha images in a ritual for the purification of the living and the dead. I hereby write this inscription for the prosperity in this life of my father, Morimoto Gidayu, who lives in Ikeda in northwest Sesshu, what is now Osaka and Hyogo Prefecture, and for the benefit in the afterlife of my late mother, Myoshin Daishi, from Owari in what is now Gifu Prefecture. So Morimoto, quote, crossed thousands of ri across the sea to offer 4 Buddha images in a ritual for the purification of the living and the dead. For the prosperity in this life of his father, and for the benefit in the afterlife of his late mother. And he did so, he writes, with this revered temple in mind, a temple understood not as Angkor Wat, but one revered as Jetavana. It was, however, not so inappropriate to understand Angkor in the early 17th century as a Buddhist temple. Although the Khmer temple complex, first built in the 12th century as a Vaishnava center of Brahmanic kingship, it was transformed into a Buddhist center of regional pilgrimage by later Khmer royalty of the late 16th century. Another inscription at Angkor Wat, this in Khmer, not in Japanese, dated 1579, states, "When His Majesty, the great devotee, rose to the throne as protector of the royal line, he sought to elevate the religion of the Buddha by restoring the great temple, stone by stone. He restored its summit with its 9-pronged spire, embellishing and covering it in gold. He then deposited sacred Buddhist relics, transferring the fruit of his royal works to the 4 great Buddhas. His Majesty, the great and pure devotee, recalled a vow he had once made to propagate the teachings of the Buddha in the country of Kampuchea." End quote. The inscription of another court figure, dated in or after the year 1586, notes that, quote, "brimming with faith, he restored the cruciform stone tower with its 4 stone Buddha images, deposited sacred Buddha relics, and vowed to become a perfect devotee of the Bodhisattva Maitreya." End quote. The 4 Buddha images identified in the Japanese map of Jetavana and nearly all of its other architectural details correspond in the main to the appearance and conditions of Angkor in the early 17th century. But how did Jetavana, a near mythic site in the sacred landscape of the Indian Buddhist past, come to be projected onto the terrain of contemporaneous Cambodia? It was but one element, I would like to suggest, in a larger transcultural process occurring in the 17th and 18th centuries, in which the location of Buddhist India shifted in the Japanese religious imagination from the Indian subcontinent to peninsular Southeast Asia, and this largely through transmarine East Asian travel and trade. Now, Buddhist India, known as Tenjiku, no, it doesn't want to move for me. Oh, click into this. Oh, there you go, I did it, amazing, thank you. Buddhist India, known as Tenjiku in Japanese, or more specifically as Go Tenjiku, the 5 regions of Tenjiku, was not the India of modern geography. Its boundaries were more fluid and undefined. Tenjiku represented a distant realm beyond the western regions, or Saiki, the Sinitic toponym for the foreign lands which defined China's occidental frontiers. For Japanese Buddhists, Tenjiku and the western regions represented the sacred sites of the Buddhist past, a realm of both alterity and authenticity. Yet before the modern period, no Japanese was able to travel to so distant a land. Indeed, the image of Buddhist India was mediated through the textual records of the Chinese Buddhist pilgrims who had traveled there centuries earlier. Manuscript maps of Tenjiku and the western regions, tracing the pilgrims' itinerary and describing the entirety of the known world, were produced and reproduced in Japan from at least the 14th century and served as the material means of religious encounter for Japanese monastics seeking the Holy Land of Buddhist origins. This particular copy has an inscription on the right-hand side that says, in making this copy, this is the monk who made this transcription of the earlier, more colorful example. In making this copy, I feel as if I have crossed over to Tenjiku. Another form of religious encounter, however, with European Jesuits and the world maps they introduced in the late 16th and early 17th century, led to the production of alternative cartographies, which redrew the boundaries of Tenjiku and the Western regions, and of Europe and the Americas as well. In both cases, cartographic objects provided the conditions of possibility for religious encounters. Encounters which were multi-directional and multivalent, more a recursive circulation than a linear trajectory, like the ebb and flow of the sea tides, or the movement on the ocean current of the ocean currents that carried merchants and missionaries across global networks of maritime ports. The interaction of European and Japanese cartographic cultures remained fluid and beyond the control of any single cultural agent. My talk today will explore this shifting and capacious locus of Tenjiku and the Western regions through an analysis of cartographic objects before and after the encounter between Japanese Buddhists and European Christians, to trace the vicissitudes of the endurance of Buddhist India in the Japanese religious imagination. Tenjiku and the Western regions comprised Japan's earliest extant map of the world, which you see here. Produced in the year 1364 by Genshubo Jukai, a monastic painter and scribe affiliated with the Nara temples of Koryuji and Kofukuji. The painting is referred to in temple inventories as a map of Tenjiku. The map translates onto a visual plane the pilgrimage account of the 7th century Chinese monk Xuanzang, whose record of the Western regions of the Great Tang describes every step of his journey from the Tang capital to the heart of Buddhist India. Jukai's map of Tenjiku, over 1.5 meters square, quotes extensively from Xuanzang's narrative and carefully traces his route through the Western regions and Tenjiku. In Jukai's map, as in Xuanzang's record, the Buddhist world is described as an ovoid continent known in Sanskrit as Jambudvipa and in Japanese as Nansenbushu. In both map and text as well, the Buddhist world is distinguished by a body of water at its very center, known in Sanskrit as Lake Anavatapta, source of the 4 great rivers, which flow from 4 animal heads, a silver ox, a lapis lazuli horse, a golden elephant, and a crystal lion on each of the 4 sides, the 4 directional cardinal directional sides of the lake, and radiates in 4 directions, emptying into the surrounding sea. This distinctive and mythic landmark, inscribed at the heart of Jukai's map of Tenjiku, would continue to distinguish Japanese Buddhist maps of the world for the next 500 years. In the 16th century, however, Japanese encountered other monastic travelers, journeying not toward, but away from Tenjiku. Iberian Jesuits who arrived on Japan's shores from the Indian port of Goa. And indeed, the European monastics who had sailed to Japan from the fabled land of Buddhist origins were initially understood as monks from Tenjiku, preaching a new form of Buddhism. In 1550, Ochi Yoshitaka, the daimyo of the Yamaguchi domain, described Francis Xavier, who he met, as, quote, a man from Tenjiku. And when Ochi Yoshinaga granted the Jesuits permission to establish a Catholic church in Yamaguchi in 1552, he declared the Jesuits to be Buddhist monks from the Western regions who came to perpetuate the Buddha Dharma. In the Jesuit publication of the Japanese document, which you see here, an interlinear translation in Latin renders Yoshinaga's Buddhist monks from the Western regions who came to Japan to perpetuate the Buddha Dharma as priests from the Occident who have come to preach the law for producing saints. The Jesuit Louis Froisse noted the frequency with which the Japanese were referred to them as, quote, people of Tenjiku, Tenjiku Jin, padres of Tenjiku, padres de Tenjiku, and monks of Tenjiku, bonzo do Tenjiku, and explains in his letters to the Jesuit authorities in Europe that being, quote, from Tenjiku meant that they had come from Japan, just from Siam. Froisse describes Japanese children shouting at the Jesuits, Tenjiku-jin, Tenjiku-jin, right? Just like, Tenjiku-jin, Tenjiku-jin. And he explains, quote, this means Siamese, Siamese, as Siam was thought of as the birthplace of their false gods, such as Shaka, Amida, and the other Buddhas. This geographic shift from South Asia to Southeast Asia is confirmed by the Vocabulario de Linguao de Japam, the Japanese-Portuguese dictionary published by the Jesuit press in Nagasaki in 1604, which simply defines Tenjiku as Siam. Jesuit sources thus document not only the Japanese understanding that the Jesuits were from Tenjiku, but also that Tenjiku extended beyond the South Asian subcontinent charted by Xuanzang to the wider geography of Southeast Asia, which had by then, as we have seen, become an important region for Japanese maritime trade. In the year 1710, a new Japanese map of the world, an Indo-centric world oriented around Tenjiku, first appeared as a large format multi-sheet woodblock print. The handy map of the myriad countries of Jambudvipa, the Nansen Bushu Bankoku Shoka no Zu, produced by the Kegon monk Hotan, is similar in scale to the manuscript maps of Tenjiku examined earlier. But here, the pious efforts of monastic scribes have been replaced with the technical efficacy of the woodblock print. And the rise and range of print culture in the Edo period, I believe, played a significant role in the geographic and semantic expansion of Tenjiku. In the preface to his map, Hotan explicitly celebrates the power of print culture, proudly announcing, quote, woodblock printing has been used so that it may be promulgated forever. And indeed, the publication was a long seller. It remained in print for more than 100 years and was also copied and issued in various simplified and reduced format editions throughout the 18th century. Some of these later editions added the details of Japanese maritime trade, marking sailing routes and distances, and labeling and identifying vessels carrying out trade with China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. Here, what is labeled as a Siamese ship is identified with the region of Tenjiku. Yet the preface to these various editions, all printed from different blocks at different dates by different publishers, all begin with the following words articulating a classical Buddhist geography. Quote, Jambudvipa is located south of Mount Sumeru and is composed of 16 great countries, 500 middle-sized countries, 10,000 small countries, and countless remote countries scattered like millet grains, end quote. Now, Hotan's printed map is clearly based on earlier manuscript maps of Tenjiku, yet he is critical of the earlier geographic tradition. He declares in his preface, quote, in the past, maps of the 5 regions of Tenjiku have been venerated in famous temples throughout Japan. I have examined these maps, but I have found the place names of China and Tenjiku in disarray, and the boundaries of the 5 regions of India are obscured. This world reaches beyond the distances traveled by the wise men of the past. Not even the famous Buddhist monks Fashan and Xuanzang, who risked their lives traveling to Tenjiku and other distant lands in search of the Buddhist scriptures, tell of it all. Although they describe the 5 regions of Tenjiku, the realm of the barbarian tribes, the Pamir Mountains, and the land of snows, they know nothing of foreign lands overseas. They did not even visit Korea, Japan, the Dikyus, Siam, or Java. Not even the successive generations of Indian and Chinese writers describe the entirety of this whole world. Nevertheless, Hotan remains deeply indebted to the very same manuscript maps he criticizes. He maintains the nuclear form of the central Lake Anavatapta and 4 great rivers that flow from the mouths of 4 mythic beasts, which had characterized all previous Buddhist cartographies. India and Central Asia are still at the center of his world, their place names following Xuanzang's record of the Western regions, with every kingdom listed sequentially and with the size of each given exactly as they appear in Xuanzang's 7th century text. Although it remained in print for more than a century and spawned multiple simplified editions, Hotan's map found perhaps its widest audience through its inclusion in what was perhaps the most popular encyclopedia of the age, Terajima Ryoan's Wakan Sanzaizue, the Japanese and Chinese collected illustrations of the 3 realms, published in 1712, in which the central section of Hotan's map, here retitled Map of the Western Regions and the 5 Regions of Tenjiku, immediately precedes Terajima's entries on the Western regions and Tenjiku. The divisions of the 5 regions of Tenjiku, the names and size of its many kingdoms, and most distinctively, do I have that? Oh, I don't have that paired with it. And most distinctively, the 4 great rivers spiraling from its center, all derived from the classical account of Xuanzang's pilgrimage as depicted in Hotan's printed map. Terajima's entry for Tenjiku indeed begins by quoting from Xuanzang's record. It reads, quote, according to the record of the Western regions, the great snow mountains lie at the center of the southern continent. China lies to the east, Tenjiku to the south, Persia to the west, and the barbarian realms to the north. Tenjiku is comprised of 5 regions: east, west, north, south, and central, and comprised of 16 great countries. But Terajima soon goes on to quote extensively and without attribution from a far more recent Japanese source that deeply informed the popular image of Tenjiku in 18th century Japan. The narrative of Tokubei Tenjiku, a maritime merchant who sailed to Tenjiku in 1627 and who returned to tell of the many wonders of that distant land in an account he wrote late in life after taking the tonsure as a Buddhist monk. The earliest account of Tokubei's adventures, the tale of Tokubei Tenjiku Monogatari, appeared in 1707 and was followed by some 45 different versions, including numerous dramatic treatments for the puppet theater and the Kabuki stage. Terajima's entry for Tenjiku contains a passage that I've circled here, lifted verbatim from the tale of Tokubei Tenjiku of 1707. It reads, before the 15th year of the Kane era, that is before 1638, numerous Japanese traveled to Tenjiku and wrote accounts of their journey. A sailor from Takasago in Harima province who traveled to Tenjiku departed Nagasaki in the 3rd year of the Kane era, 1626, and arrived in the kingdom of Magada in Tenjiku the following year. He sailed south from Nagasaki to Taiwan, west to Canton, southwest to Kochi, what is modern Hanoi, south to Champa, central and southern coastal Vietnam, and then south to Cambodia. He sailed further south to Siam, and then northwest to Hantebia. This is, do I have it there now? This is what Kamfer names Bantanpia, or what the Thai call Ban Chao Phraya, the village of Chao Phraya at the mouth of the Diusa River in Magada. In all, 3,700 li from Nagasaki. At the castle of Ayutthaya, he presented the vermilion seal. So the Tenjiku of this contemporary tale is no longer the inaccessible land of Xuanzang's record, which no Japanese traveler had ever visited, but rather a port within sailing distance from Nagasaki, within a network of maritime trade connecting East and Southeast Asia. The Diusa, or River of Flowing Sands, was the term that Xuanzang used for the Taklaman Desert, but is identified by Tenjiku Tokubei as the Chao Phraya River, the river that flows from Ayutthaya, the capital of Siam. Oh, here is the Chao Phraya on the map from Engelbert Kempfer. Here you can see this is Ban Tian Pia down here, what Tokubei calls Hantebia, and what is Ban Chao Phraya, the village of Chao Phraya. Oh, I'm sorry, no cats are allowed in class. You're gonna have to put. Okay, is that a cat or a dog? Oh, it's a dog. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, my bad. My bad. Okay, we'll get to that in the question and answer. Sorry. And at Ayutthaya, Tokubei presented the vermilion seal. This is Ayutthaya in a European depiction from the period. The ancient kingdom of Magadha, the ancient Indian kingdom of Magadha, is here identified with Ayutthaya, the official, the capital of the kingdom, where Tokubei presented the Japanese vermilion seal, the official government permit to engage in overseas trade. During this period, that is, in the early 1600s, 350 such permits were issued by the Japanese government to Japanese merchants, 56 of them for voyages to Siam, where the port of Ayutthaya was a center of intra-Asian maritime trade and also the site of what was perhaps the largest Nihonmachi in Southeast Asia, with a population ranging from 1,000 to 1,500 Japanese residents in the 1620s. But Terajima continues to quote from the tale of Tokubei as he goes deeper into the Tenjiku of Siam. He continues, he then travels 27 li upriver to the castle at Bangkok, and another 20 ri to the city of Kurihisara, where long ago Kukai of Japan and the Bodhisattva Manjushri are said to have engaged in a battle of wisdom. At the temple of Tehiyatai are the remains of the dwelling of the Buddha's disciple Sudatta, the man who donated the land and built the Jetavana Vihara. Over the next 7 li, there are 3 temples to Shakyamuni with standing, sitting, and reclining images of the Buddha as their main icons. The Buddha images are made of earth and stone, and pilgrims have been applying sheets of gold leaf to them for thousands of years, so that they now appear as if made of gold. And Vulture Peak is 1 ri in height and lies 42 li upriver from the capital city, end quote. So Tenjiku remained the land of the Buddhist past, yet one not reducible to India, at least in today's understanding of that country. Instead, the sacred geography of Buddhist origins extended well into Southeast Asia. The ancient kingdom of Magadha, home to Sudatta, who provided the early Buddhist community with a great monastery of Jetavana, where the Japanese Shingon patriarch Kukai is said to have sparred with the Indian Bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjushri. This is something that appears in Muromachi popular fiction, actually, and where Shakyamuni preached the Mahayana Sutras on Vulture Peak was to be found in Siam. According to the tale of Tokubei, quote, the names of the places in Tenjiku include Tonkin, Kochi, which is the birthplace of Bodhidharma, Chambusa, Luzon, and Kabocha, end quote. Lands within the modern borders of Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. A later manuscript map of Terajima's printed map of Tenjiku here bears an inscription also transcribed from the Wakan Sansaizue. But of the 7 pages of text comprising Terajima's entry on Tenjiku, all that is included in the transcription is the 1.5-page quotation from the Siamese adventures of Tenjiku Tokubei. Which brings us back to the map of Angkor as Jetavana, where a longer inscription dated 1772, as I started to read from earlier in today's talk, identifies the map as a copy made in 1715 of an earlier map drawn in the mid-17th century, and explains, Shimano Kengyo, chief interpreter from Nagasaki, was ordered by the shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu to go to the Jetavana monastery in the country of Magadha in central Tenjiku, examine it, and report on his return. It continues that when the shogun spoke of the difficulties experienced by the famous Chinese pilgrims of the past who traveled to Tenjiku, Kengyo is said to have replied, quote, the Chinese Buddhist pilgrims of the past had to travel incalculable distances from China to the interior of Tenjiku. On the way, they were often abducted by ferocious beasts or encountered brigands and suffered all sorts of misfortunes. They could walk 100 Japanese li without encountering any human habitation. Yet by boarding a Dutch ship, one can travel not only to Tenjiku, but completely around the world. End quote. Other Japanese travelers in the Japanese cartographic imagination, then, India remained a floating signifier, a shifting site of alterity and authenticity, unfixed within the circuits of transcultural encounter between Japan, Europe, South, and Southeast Asia. In the 14th century, a medieval mappamundi provided the material media by which Japanese monastics could encounter the sacred places of Buddhist India by following the itinerary of a 7th century Chinese pilgrim. In the early 16th century, European Jesuits sailing from Goa to Nagasaki, who were identified in Japan as at once Indian and Siamese, sailing attempted to replace the Buddhist world map with a Christian one. In the early 18th century, a Japanese Buddhist monk appropriated and refracted Jesuit cartography to provincialize Europe and the Americas and recenter the world on the Tenjiku and western regions of Xuanzang. This reassertion of Indocentrism was widely adapted and circulated through simplified reprints and the popular press, which appropriated contemporaneous castaway narratives to relocate Buddhist India in Siam and Vietnam. And the Japanese religious imagination fused with the experience of maritime trade, documented cartographically this drift from South to Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna unshare here. Thank you so much for this really kind of comprehensive view of integrating this map into a context that is relevant for exactly our project, and pointing out the various levels of authority and at the same time authenticity. I will now open the floor for questions. Maybe first a question from this room, and the people joining us online are reminded that they can ask questions through the chat. Please send a chat and then I will read it out. Yeah, let's go down. Good. Do we have questions from this room? And maybe just to get this going, have you visited Angkor Wat already? Are there archives that have maybe presented to them, have been presented from Japan, or it doesn't say if those are paintings or sculptures, more likely paintings?
Yeah, I don't know what this Morimoto would have brought. I would kind of assume they might be they might have been sculptures, and maybe one's commissioned there. I don't know. But no, the only records of the Japanese presence there are those inscriptions themselves. You know, I mean, Angkor has been, you know, through centuries and centuries of destruction and rebuilding. So nothing besides the inscriptions themselves remain to document the presence or activities of Japanese there.
So Matthew Stavros is asking if we also accept questions.
From dogs?
No, not from dogs, but read out by the people who want to ask orally. Yes, please do so. Matthew, you're on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Hello, Max. Wonderful, wonderful talk. Thanks very much. As you know, as you heard me speak last year at USC, you know that I agree wholeheartedly with everything you're saying. I'd really like to sit down and have a chat with you. I'd like to bring up a few ideas that kind of function as commentary somewhat, and maybe end up with a sort of a question. It seems fairly clear to me that you know, the great Ashoka in the 3rd century before the Common Era in India had these grandiose ideas about, you know, sort of creating a Hindu Buddhist kingdom or a Buddhist kingdom, and, you know, building 84,000 stupas around the subcontinent that may have gone to Sri Lanka, and some missionaries may have taken to Southeast Asia. You know, this idea of creating sort of, you know, axis mundi, these world pillars that sort of connected the secular world with the sacred realm, these sort of anthropocosmic connectors. It has a lot of resonances with the idea of Mount Meru, of Mount Sumeru, you know, creating this sort of central pillar of the universe, the center of the Buddhist universe, real and imagined. And as you say, you know, a floating signifier, which is a great word. It's sort of this thing you might strive towards, yet never actually concretely imagine arriving at. Of course, Ashoka's ideal of a Hindu Buddhist kingdom was probably best realized in Southeast Asia, places like Angkor and Borobudur and maybe Prambanan and Pagan in modern Myanmar, where they built temple palace complexes like Angkor, like you showed us so well, that had this very clear sort of galactic polity design to them. You know, the palace, the temple are one. They sit at the center of the kingdom, the center of the universe. They represent the center of the mandalized kingdom, and they also represent Mount Meru. In a way, sort of, I say that as preface, because what I'm wondering, sort of, and I'm trying to sculpt a good question, but this idea of sort of Tenjiku as this sort of central or like middle kingdom, you know, sort of this mythical floating signifier, a place, a Buddhist center, a Buddhist middle. How does that get reconciled with the actual word Chugoku, like the middle kingdom? Should we think about Chugoku as like purely like concrete geography, and then Tenjiku as mythical, as religious, or like, do these ideas conflict? Or because there's lots of talk about Chugoku like always in Japanese history.
Yeah, when you have Tenjiku at one end and Honcho on the other, right? Japan and Tenjiku in the sort of Sangoku 3-country world view. China isn't Chugoku. China is Morokoshi. China is To, Tong, or more often, and as is on the map, the 14th century map and its copies into the 19th century, China is Shina. That is, it's the Chinese Buddhist term for China, as Tenjiku is the Buddhist term the Chinese Buddhist term for India. So even China drops into a kind of something, drops into a Buddhist vocabulary, not the central flower at the center of the world, which is the classical Chinese worldview. I mean, if you notice in those Goten Jikuzu, those maps of Jambudvipa, those maps of Tenjiku that are based on Xuanzang's narrative, there's what looks like a bite taken out of the right-hand side. That is, the entire world continent is covered with the red line of Xuanzang's itinerary, mountains and trees and valleys and lakes and rivers and stupas and temples everywhere. But China is left blank. China is tabula rasa. China is empty because Xuanzang doesn't describe China, right? It was an image of Xuanzang's text, and the only thing that Xuanzang says about China is, oh, I left from this city and passed this gate, and I returned through this gate and this city. That's the only text notated on what's otherwise a completely empty space. So you could say that in the Japanese Buddhist world picture, China kind of, or at least in the world that's based on Xuanzang, China is entirely absent. Now, there are later copies of these manuscript maps where they start to fill in China, but they're filling in China not based on anything from Xuanzang. They're filling in China based on Qing printed maps. Yeah. Oh, we'll talk more.
Absolutely fascinating. If I may just make one more small interesting comment. While you were talking, I was frantically searching my computer for the reference. I couldn't find it, but Max, there's a great map from, I think, Kamakura period that depicts Southeast Asia, and the island of Java. It's Java is sort of long and narrow, and it says Kongojo, which is like Vardra. So the whole island of Java is imagined as a giant Vardra. I just wanted to mention that because it's, I think
you have to send that. You have to send that to me.
If I find it, I swear.
The early Japanese maps of Japan, like the Gyokizu style maps, explicitly depict Japan and annotate it as a single-pronged Vajra, a tokko. So
it's probably one of those.
Mm-hmm.
I'll look for that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for this question. Matthew, can you, you're already muted yourself. Perfect. Good. So I have a question from the chat. Vera Dorofeva Lichtmann, CNRS in Paris. You mentioned that the Hotan map had the same scale as the earlier Tenjiku-centered Japanese map. What do you mean exactly? And can you speak of a scale in a classical cartographic sense in these cases? And she continues, we currently translate the Saiki in plural as the Western regions. However, its original meaning in Chinese sources of the Han Dynasty would be the Western region. I suppose that the meaning of this term evolved in time due to the extension of geographical knowledge about the West. Could you please comment on this?
Yes, thank you, Vera, for that question. That question about scale, which is so important in the history of cartography, as you have well shown. What I meant by scale is simply the general dimensions of the cartographic object. That is, Hotan's map is roughly the same outer dimensions as the Gotenjikuzu, the Tenjikuzu of the manuscript tradition. So, and I think in that case, scale, the scale of the detail is similar as well. Now, I don't mean scale in any technical mathematical sense. I just mean in the sort of general relationship of size, which then determines the general modalities of reception. the distance you have to stand from it or sit from it to see it or read it. And I think both on the Hotan map and on the manuscript traditions, in order to see the entire world, you have to stand back. Back so far, you cannot read the detail or the text. To read the detail or the text, you have to move close to the surface of the map. And then you kind of move around the map. So it's a kind of kinesthetic interaction with the cartographic object. And also sort of a spatial oscillation back and forth, trying to go from the overall picture of the experience of that world to the detailed view in which this is not the case on Hotan's map because Xuanzang's itinerary isn't drawn on there, although all of his place names are. In order to sort of follow along or even decipher the details, you have to move in so close you can no longer see the overall scale. So I'm thinking scale in that kind of sense. Yeah, Western region or Western regions. Yeah, I suppose from the classical Han perspective, it's Western region. I don't know if I'm using the plural just out of sloppiness or here, I'm going to try and cover my ass. It wasn't just sloppy because I'm arguing that the Western regions, like Tenjiku, become plural and fluid. That is, when the Iberian Jesuits are identified by the Ouchi in the 16th century as monks from the Western region or regions. I mean, the characters are not singular or plural. It's clearly it's clearly not the same Western region that the Han were referring to. It's clearly a notion of this distant Buddhist other, which has migrated, at least within this sort of cartographic imagination and the geographic imagination. Thanks so much for that.
So we have one more question from the internet. Caitlin Cariadi, thank you for your fascinating lecture. I was wondering if you could speak more about the cartographic imagination of Southeast Asia at the specific moment when sources such as the Gion Shōja map and Tenjiku Tokubei Monogatari were created. That is, in the decades, centuries after the Japanese were able to travel to and return from Southeast Asian port towns. That is, when Southeast Asia had become more distant than it had been when the information for such sources were initially gathered.
I wish I could. That's what I need to work on now. That is more of that. I mean, speaking generally, in the popular imagination, if we take Tenjiku Tokubei as an example, his story becomes tremendously important in Kabuki. And there are dozens and dozens of Kabuki plays with Tenjiku Tokubei, which basically have almost nothing to do with the original forms of the narrative, other than this was a sailor who went to Tenjiku and came back with all kinds of magical powers, especially toad magic. And there's all of these fantastic prints by Kuniyoshi and others, and also illustrating in the illustrated narratives of Tenjiku Tokubei riding this giant toad. And even in contemporary Kabuki, you know, when they do Tenjiku Tokubei, there's this, 20-foot toad on stage blowing smoke and things like that. The official trade with Southeast Asia, ends by the late 1630s. But we know that those materials are still moving back and forth and are so important to Edo culture, as Christine Booth has shown, when looking at things like shark skin or ray skin or deer hides, antlers, and all of these other important materials that were essential to Japanese, material and visual culture in the period. Yeah, I think that's a great topic. Please study it more and teach me more about it. Thank you.
I would like to urge also our graduate students in the room, if they have a question. Margot, you have one? Loud, so people can hear you.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. There's been a recent dissertation written at Princeton on Ito, and he's a fascinating figure. And his interest in Indic things, is part of this sort of renewed Meiji fascination with Buddhist India, because this is the period when Japanese monks first traveled to India, right? As Richard Jaffe has shown in his book Seeking Shakyamuni. And yeah, I was just walking in Tokyo a few days ago, and I turned left and I got this incredible view of the Tsukiji Honganji, right, which Ito designed, which is this sort of Indian fantasy combined with the Japanese temple. I don't know exactly how he came across it, but there's sort of good Japanese scholarship on the history of scholarship on that map. But yeah, I think interestingly enough, Meiji is also one of those points where there's this sort of renewed interest in Buddhist India. You see it in Japanese painters who went to India. Micah Auerbach has worked on some of them, and Japanese monks and also aristocrats, who are traveling back and forth. The Otani mission, and he too built this sort of fantastic, sort of Indian, Islamic, Persian fantasy house in Kobe, where he brought back all of his collection from Central Asia and had a school in which the students would study these objects in rooms that were painted with, Nihonga versions of scenes of India. So there's a great deal of sort of Japanese Indian sort of fascination going on sort of across, and not just within explicitly Buddhist culture, but in Japanese culture in this period. So I think it's a fascinating moment to think about.
We have a reply from Vera. Would using the term format be more appropriate than scale in the case of comparing the Japanese Buddhist world maps? This is a question to a native English speaker.
Yeah. Yeah. Format, sure. But maybe I could just say size rather than scale, right? If I'm talking about just the dimension of the object and the size of the detail. Because scale, as you're right to point out, is such a loaded technical term within the history of cartography. Yes, thank you, Barrett.
I think in the interest of getting you to the dinner place, we have 1 more minute. We have 1 more question that can be answered quickly. Thomas, can you come in front, because nobody hears you, we realized when you talk.
We can repeat the question too.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. I'm just kind of interested about more like what the catalyst, I guess, for this shift is. Was it the Jesuits arriving that kind of kicked this into gear, or was there kind of an understanding beforehand that Tenjiku was Siam? And if so, was that related to merchants going there, or Like, what's
Yeah,
the
I
catalyst?
don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's evidence out there that I haven't come across yet, but it would be strange that the Jesuits would occasion the first identification of Tenjiku with Siam. Because if indeed they are simply repeating what they were told, and they have no reason to have invented Siam, then clearly this was already there in the culture. So yeah, I think one would want to look at sort of trans-Asian maritime trade, you know, before the mid 15th century, before the mid 16th century. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna close the Q&A down now. Thank you again. A big thank you to Max for this wonderful lecture.
And if anyone has other questions or comments and wants to follow up, just email me. dm438@columbia.edu. Thanks a lot.
And we are continuing our lecture series. Be sure to stay on the website, and we will post around the next event. Thank you so much for joining.